Hello. You're muted. Well, sorry, you aren't muted, but you're not coming through.
I think I had the mic in the
I can
box.
hear you now.
You can?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but you're not hearing me correctly. I'm just trying to get this so it's like, oops, hang on a
I
second.
know. So I updated the OS last night, and all sorts of things all decided to reset themselves to settings I didn't want.
So voice is okay now, right?
Yeah, yeah, it's fine. I can hear you. Yep.
Okay, so a couple of things. Number one is in terms of terminology, I
Yep.
had a brief chat while on the train this morning with Fabien because I'm a bit worried he's going to run off and prototype without having the right kind of shapes on things, so to speak. And why am I recording? I should not do that. Right. So what I have decided, and checking with you, see if you agree,
Mhm.
I think I'll show a document actually. Hang on. Share the whole thing. Right. Close that. So, yeah, so under volume and knowledge object design,
Yeah.
by the way, having links in to documents in here is absolutely transformative. Should I change it to light dark mode or?
No, I can see fine. That's fine.
Okay. Right. So I'm just going to walk you through. Obviously, I haven't done a lot of this, but so here's the thing. I believe that our knowledge world should contain only two things: volumes and objects. That means we don't have to worry about what's the difference between a library and not a library and all of that stuff. Let me walk you through my thinking on that. A volume is essentially a list. So you should be able to type it manually, all the aspects if you want to.
Hmm.
It can, of course, contain more useful, powerful stuff. So if you have a thing and an object and a volume, and you want to move it somewhere else, I feel that maybe the act of copy should create a new volume for that one or few items, which may contain the contextual information or not. Just to have an object by itself, I think is not a good idea. So the whole point is that by having volumes, first of all, if we think about it Rob Spigert way, it's a bit evocative. Also means we no longer have folders or desktops or anything like that. There's a space that's connected to other spaces or volumes with things in it, right?
Yes, I mean, it. Well, that's how I always think of it. To me, all that other stuff was just skeuomorphism that was not needed. The whole thing is
Yeah.
a volume, whatever you call it. If you just think of it like a holodeck, you can either see something you can't. The things that you can see are objects. What they look like is what they want to look like, which I think Rob caught very neatly when he said somebody, I don't know, matter who, it didn't matter who. Somebody said, what's a document? He said, well, whatever it needs to be. I thought, absolutely spot on, because it's legacy terminology that is not helpful. So he's writing a book. He's got lots of things, objects, that are of all sorts of different shapes and purposes. They're basically, simplest terms, they're a unique ID because things have got to know what they are in constructional software sense, but the user will never see that. But they know what the reason they know what they are is they have a unique ID. What explains what they are is the metadata they have. Um, and so that's all you need. A volume is simply just a collection of GUIDs in one
Yeah.
level. Now,
I,
if you want to put the other things, it's like a sort of not quite a style sheet, but it's a thing of saying, okay, well, if I want to take this volume and put it over there, I want these additional affordances. But the question to ask yourself is that information essentially just describing the prototypes that you want to see? Sorry, that word may mean a different thing to you, but the types, the different looking things that you might see in the space.
Yeah,
They're
and
all
I
just
agree.
objects. The only reason they look different is we give them extra information. Said, I am not one of those.
Yeah,
Now, whether I'm a platypus and they're a cow, or I'm a green triangle and they're a blue square, it's all the same thing.
yes,
The challenge is to get people to look past the visual. We get too hung up in what it looks like. So,
yeah, yeah.
so whether the text is this big or that big. So the other really interesting thing is, I think it's beginning to sort of flow into unintentionally flow into some of the discussions, is that I think for some people, text is what you can see. For other people, it's string data stored within the objects. They're both the same thing. Unfortunately, they mean very, very different things to different people, which means some disjointed conversation.
So, yeah, I mean, obviously, mostly we care about text. I'm going to do a slight.
Well, no, you see, I'm going to call you on that because I don't know what you mean by we mostly care about text, because I've just explained to you text means different things to different people. So you've now actually just unintentionally stated the opposite of what I've just said. So I don't understand what you mean by that.
I don't mean by strings. I mean that visual text you can see as text.
Right, I'm not sure that's strictly true actually, because a lot of things you want to do with text are not necessarily seen in the moment. A lot of the really cool, interesting analytical work that people are doing with text involves the knowledge of it, the interrelation of it, but it's not necessarily has to be enacted visually in front of them.
Oh, I completely agree with you. But I don't, when you say text as strings inside an object, I'm not particularly interested in moving a rectangle there and turning it into a cube and that kind of stuff, or video only. I think we're on the same page on that. But I want to take a slight aside and come back to this really important issue, because I'm very grateful that you and I are so aligned on this. So I've been playing around with the mapping. I'm doing a few updates. And one of them is, if I now, what is that? Oh, okay, nothing's assigned out. This is like a new document. Actually, there goes a person. Why can I not? Oh, okay. So here we go, right? As you know, I can do things like this. You've seen this many times. What has changed now a little bit is we had this issue of lines going in and out.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of stopped working. So actually, just going to go back to my journal because it's easier. So here, these are just two tests, but if I now select hypertext, it goes to things, right? If I select binding mechanism, which is a ACM hypertext document, double click, I get my AI generated, humanly edited summary for myself, right? The bold
Mm-hmm.
text is stuff that is also displayed, as you know. So if I click on it, it will have a line to hypertext, but now it also works properly that hypertext has a light line back to it. However, if you look at this one, hypertext in XR, which has it underlined because, yeah, okay, let's just do this. If I jump to it, it is actually a document that I've written, right?
Okay.
And it has all the same kind of metadata that I can choose to put in here, so that even though it's my document, when I click on hypertext, it should go here. It's just not working yet, but the whole point is it will be.
Yeah, I'm just confused as to, I mean, that to what you're showing, what I'm seeing is something that is sort of essentially a form of spatial hypertext. You've got all these things. What's not really clear as you play around with the lines is what you think what is your intent with the lines? What are you put it in, let me put it a more useful way. What understanding do you get from the lines versus the absence of the lines?
The these things that I happen to have on the left here are kind of the subject matter types.
No, you're not.
I'm trying to explain the intention by
No,
showing.
no, so the
Mark,
broad thing is,
Mark, I'm really trying to. I'm a visual person. I'm trying to show you. Okay, I'm not going to just sit on my hands and just talk it. My intent here is that when I go through my own work,
yeah,
I can click on things that I think is related to it. It's basically searches, and just see what it moves to. If it's just for one, it's no different from a find command, right? But now I can see that this authoring in XR blah blah they have that.
But what does the link imply? What does the link actually do?
The link implies only that this document, for instance, is about annotations. So if I click on annotations here, I can see these documents address annotations.
Right. Sorry, I was addressing so, but that's not actually what they're doing. What they're doing is they're linked to any object whose main text field has the string that is the word that is the title of the thing. That's what's actually happening as opposed to what you think is happening. Yep. That's what I'm trying to get at is what have you, and there's no, sorry, in asking the question, there's no implied sort of negative in this. I'm just trying to get to the heart of it because these things are best as exploratory spaces. And the reason I mentioned Joyce's Surren's Shapes is that weirdly, back in 1988, when admittedly sort of hypertext and what you could do on a screen was very different, but he did have a strong notion that there were two things you were doing.
Okay. Stop screen share. See if I've lost them completely.
The personal understanding of a space. The other is coming from the direction more of a map, like
you dropped out for about a whole minute. You were talking about Joyce, and then
okay, yeah, Joyce, and the fact that so it's a confusion unintentionally between the fact of something that annoyingly some of us do at the same time. Sometimes we do them separately, which is, am I constructing something for my understanding or am I constructing for other people's understanding? A further confusion, and I'm sorry to add these things in, but I think they're pertinent to unpicking the problem, is that I think we get very confused by what we mean by collaboration. We tend to assume that it is some version, literal or digital, of people standing in the same space, looking at exactly the same thing. Now, posit this. If I have your map, and because I for whatever reason, think of it a different way. There's no reason I couldn't see your map, but what you have in italics, I have in bold, or they're something else. Doesn't matter what they are, but they're not what you see. But it's the same thing, the same information, viewed a different way. Now, if that enables me to understand it better, that's good. Now, if you and I are doing collaborative work, that's fine, as long as we don't have to see the other person's vision, because my memory palace will look like rubbish to you and vice versa. Or that's one of the challenges potentially there is. And we keep making the mistake of thinking, right, the answer is to have a common picture and it should look like this. No, I think that's entirely, it's probably the wrong solution to something we can solve, which is, so what you see, if you think of it a bit like view specs. So I could give you something that I'd done, but you put in a sense, your Frode view spec on it, and you'd see something that might not look like what I thought it is, but you'd see what I intended. Because what I'm doing when I'm putting the information into the space, when I'm doing the things that allow the lines or the various stylings to occur, is I'm signaling intent. And I think, and this has come out of sort of this is an emergent understanding from actually years of practice. So I probably started out at the simple thing. So, well, I'll just find all occurrences of this word. But then you get semantic collision and it gets messy. So you step back and say, no, let's actually capture what I really intended. That's why I was asking about the intent of the links. So what you're getting is something that's interesting, but you're actually unsurprisingly finding that what you rapidly get to is too much or too little. Through no fault of your own, but it's the nature of the way it's constructed. Link types are just circling back around again from the earliest time of hypertext for a different reason. So go ahead.
Just want to say we agree on all of this, every single thing.
Sure.
Right? We really do. And you are highlighting an issue which is still to be resolved. I agree with that also. There's a couple of things I just want to show you and then have some real questions for you, because there is no air between us on this. So let me see, is it, yeah, over here, right. So this is very crude, all the issues, that's all fine. I have no
Yeah.
argument with that. I just wanted to show you some procedures. For instance, from here, I can link to any document on the computer, and I can now add a definition,
Yeah.
which can be, it has all the issues you said, and I
Yeah.
look forward to refining the logic of how we as humans and systems deal with that over time. But now this thing is here, and it has to a limited degree, because finding my own work I find to be quite difficult. But if I double click on it here and I get this little jump button or delete to have it come up, it's absolutely phenomenal.
No, that's really interesting. One of a sort of not a question but an observation, because it'll turn up eventually, is right. So the annotation you made about the link is not actually an annotation on the link, it's an annotation on the object that is the proxy for the target of the link. So you have an object in your map space that is basically a proxy for a document as opposed to just a note. And there's no problem with that at all. It means that essentially one of the primitives within your map space is things that are documents as opposed to things that are just things. And that's fine. That's not challenging.
Yeah, no, we're getting to that. And also, a key thing that I want to be able to do now, because it really, Dini look, I love working with Dini. Last year was a challenge, but we really got to a good place. And her particular academic interest, particularly with things like annotated bibliographies, is something you and I can really, really help her with. Of course, we already have copy as citation from reader. So what I want to have very soon for my own testing here is paste into the map, not just writing, a citation from reader, right? Which should be technically relatively trivial. And that's why I was showing you this earlier stuff of what kind of stuff is behind the scenes.
Have you spent any time looking at things like story space or things? Because there's a lot of prior art here that I think you're missing that you would find helpful. Not, I mean, that you need to be oppressed by what's gone before, but I'm watching you reinvent known things, and I'm just wondering if it might not make it easier if you put a little time into sort of looking at some of those,
I think
because
I
they
have
actually
looked,
exist.
Mark.
Yeah.
I have looked, but in strong agreement with you. If you want to do a recorded session where you demonstrate it to me and others, that would be very useful.
I could certainly do that. I mean, one of the things I'm wondering about is, because a lot of these things are quite deep, the sort of question is that it's too easy to do a demo and then you're seeing everything soup to nuts and it all goes past the blaze. So I'm thinking, one of the things that I think would be useful if we did that would be to think, okay, what are the particular ideas that we want to put in front of people who may not have seen them manifested in this way. So the idea is not, do I think application or view or whatever X or Y is better than Z? No, it's not that sort of thing. It's
No,
saying,
no, I
do
understand.
we have a commonality so that I can look at, so that you could look at another thing that has a map, say, oh, right, so that bit there is the bit I understand. In other words, it's making this linkage because I sense that some of the underlying of some of the circularity in the discussions we've been having. So I have an idea for something that if I get round to it, I'll do as a blog post on the thing. I mean, one of this is that I think that people have, through no fault of their own, very different understandings of what they mean by
Yeah,
memory power.
okay, yeah, I understand that, and I would
And
really
that's
appreciate.
causing confusion. So there's sort of linking that to what in another context might be called a spatial haptics. But I don't get hung up on that term either. It's more about one of the really interesting things that we can do in XR. I think more in a more visceral way than just doing in a box on a screen, is this thing of you take lots of stuff, you put it where you want it, you make it look like you want to make sense to you. And I can see how that looks like a memory palace, but I think in fact it isn't.
Well, that's why I've reduced the language to objects and volumes.
Yeah. And the only thing really, I mean, yeah, right. So that
Uh,
you actually mainly have one primitive there. You have objects because the volume lies outside the space. The volume is what you're seeing. It's a descriptor for the
The
whole of the
volume
thing.
is the frame, and the reason for this is well, first of all, the notion of being able to paste these Dini citations I think was going to be very, very important. I will experiment with that on my own time, my own money, and author reader, and then bring that into Fabienne because it'll be JSON based anyway. However, a really, really important thing here is that both the volume and the object needs to say what type it is, because now that we're going through little things, if you take a document and you decide you want to see it in little nodes where the node is a heading and you open it, so to speak, and you see the text of that section of the document, that is a legitimate use. An equally legitimate use is a defined term and a definition, etc.
Yeah, so it's type. By its type, essentially what you're saying is there needs to be a field. The value of the field indicates within the volume what its purpose is. Now, the cool part about this, and this is what I was trying to get to.
Hang on, I just have to emphasize how important what you said. You said what its purpose is. That is, I really want to highlight that for the recording, because you're absolutely right, because that is the purpose of the creator for what that is. The user, reader, may choose to interpret that in a different way, but it should have been put there, so you can view it entirely differently. So yes, thank you for using the word purpose.
That's really good. Actually, you captured another really interesting thing that bedevils all metadata. Is the one damn thing we don't write down is why the hell we did what we did. Now, why we did it might prove different later, but the point is at the moment of doing it, I did this because I thought it'd be useful to show that this thing is not like that. And that is a non-trivial thing to capture, especially when you're doing the exploration phase of things. The interesting part, what I was sort of reaching towards was this idea that something came out of a sort of email conversation with Rob, and he was saying, well, couldn't time be a color spectrum? I thought it could. I think I've done enough to know that it wouldn't actually work in the way he envisages, but it's a cool idea. But the underlying point is good. So being able to say, look, here I am set in my volume, and I'm saying, right, where I need you to be and what I need you to look like needs to reflect your relationship to the following thing. So in other words, if I'm a person in his sort of narrative volume, I might go to a particular location, or I might appear in multiple places. So this is the really interesting, this is sort of the view specs element of it, and it's moving away from the memory palace. In the simplistic notion, yes, this garbage in space makes sense to me because I put it there. That's where it impinges on the edge of the memory palace idea. But it's actually something much richer and much more flexible than that. And the other thing that's swum into focus, the epiphany in a way, is that, and I don't know where, one of the side conversations with somebody, is that, and I'm probably getting the numbers the wrong way where I am, but Engelbart had this notion of, the 1, 2, 3. And in my mind, the 1 is the tool maker, the 2 is the manager, and the 3 is the process worker. Two important things that I'd stress, or one important thing I'd stress before you start is this is not a hierarchy in the sense of power or structure. This is functional role. So the type 1 to type 2 process strikes me as very much in this very open, flexible space where it's all about understanding the nation relationships. A type 2 to 3 space is exactly the opposite. It's all about hard-edged design process because it's about lack of ambiguity. So one is an eschewal of premature formalization. The other is the opposite. The other is, no, I want as much damn formalization as I can get because I don't want my type 3 person to be in any way, shape or form confused about what they have to do. Not because they're stupid or something, but because it is not properly explained to them. The difficulty is we're doing those two things in the same space. And we tend to talk about them at the same time. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think we need to start thinking that those are actually discrete modes of thought and work. Now, you or I can do it in our own play space, and we can flop from one to the other without it being problematic because we know why we did it. Once you start broadening it out, it does become more problematic because you need to know, and a number of difficulties arise where we're doing the wrong mode with the wrong person, if you see what I mean. So in other words, we're actually communicating the wrong thing. So we send someone who wants a clear picture, something that's just a mess of data, or vice versa, because somebody who just wants to understand the shape of the problem does not want to be told somebody else's solution. That is unhelpful because that immediately destroys their ability to see the nature of the thing. So these are a couple of things that have arisen out of the last two weekly meetings that I think are clearer to me than they weren't before, and I think they help understand, what I'm seeing. And this is why I've been interested in thinking what you're doing with the map, because the I think the author is very much a type one to type two communicative role, even if you are both the type one and the type two. There may be times when you want to use a map to show somebody else, in which case you've done a step change. You're now in the type two role, indicating type three. And as I say, it's not a hierarchy. By saying it's type three, you're not saying this is some person who's less understanding or less clever than yourself. No, no, you're simply showing something else, something to somebody else, where your intent is to provide clarity of your view, regardless of whether they agree with it, but clarity of your view as expressed in the information you show them, rather than saying, here you are, here's this ball of string, go play with it, which you may choose to do, but I think you give people a different thing. And that's just something to bear in mind when you're needling on the edges of these things, because I think your point about type is, I mean, we can call it what we like, and this is why I'm sort of, I'm not being antsy about it. I'm deliberately trying to avoid giving things hard names too early, because sometimes the names are too prescriptive and therefore actually make it harder to understand the process they do, because we made a bad guess first time around.
I agree with that concern. I also think that the architecture should be very, very simple, which of course we all agree on. And I'm thinking we go around in the community and suddenly we're talking about a different aspect and it becomes messy. We've been doing this for years. So it's really good now that we have a brilliant programmer, Fabienne, and we have a decision made on Monday, basically made before, but it was really solidified. We're doing little things that can be moved about. That's really what we're talking about. But then there are some requirements from the real world, like some sort of a narrative. When you're done with thinking and you publicize your work, someone coming into it needs to be able to find a place to start and see how things hang together. Doesn't mean it's a linear narrative, but it needs to be presented for another rather than your mindless murder wall, right?
Well, yes and no. Uh, yes, that is a thing that needs to happen, but no is to assume that it always needs to happen. Because if
Fair
there's
enough.
a thought space that you have that only you ever see, you don't need to give yourself the burden of a narrative you don't need. Now, here's the problem when we
Oh, I
discuss
agree.
this.
I
We,
agree
we
with that.
we all sort of feel, wait a minute, is someone just obliquely, prodding me with a stick? And I don't think it's that at all. It's so that the difficult part, the challenge actually is getting a clearer view of this state from the exploratory to the explanatory, I think. And I don't claim to have an answer to this. I think I now just see the problem more clearly. And so part of it is you may have information in your map, for want of a better word, your volume, that is there not for your understanding, but with knowledge that you're going to get to the point where you're going to want these things to be separate to those. And the only way you can do that for another person is for those things to have knowledge of that. I suspect it's more complicated than just being a type, a thing.
Yeah, no,
The
Mark,
lesson,
I
yeah,
agree. I agree. But I'm talking about something slightly different. I'm saying that in this world, if you have let's say you're working on a glossary, you have a definition, you have a term and a definition, easy. But then you
yeah,
also have, you want to take a traditional document with headings and sections and put it into this kind of a space. So then probably the heading will be the little text, and then the section will be the big text, right? Which would have to be rich text. I know there are further complications, but the point is that when you display this, there should be a way for the user, whether author or reader person, to know that these are headings and they follow a
okay,
certain initial sequence. These are glossary terms. They can be all over the place.
okay. I understand. I think I'm used to a more decoupled system of that. So the tool, the process I'm used to using works a slightly different way. Instead of thinking this is the heading and this is the body, I have essentially a number of database fields. an object has fields and the fields have values. I decide when I'm moving it out of that space, I'm linearizing it for somebody else. I say, okay, what I actually want is I want this to be the sort of heading, and I want you to use that field, or I want you to use the first paragraph of that field. So it's harder to do quick first time around because it's all strange. It's much richer because what you don't do is you avoid the overhead of building in hard edge design in a place where you actually don't need it, but you put it there out of expediency. And that doesn't mean that the design that one does is wrong or not useful. It just means that actually again, it's premature formalization. We've decided something that we don't know what it is yet, that we're preemptively going to
Yeah, but
decide it has
Mark,
things about it.
look at what we talked about a few minutes ago. If you are doing an annotated bibliography, you select some text, and when you want to copy it as a citation into another document. So that means that that bit of stuff needs to have the selected text and the citation information, right?
Only if I'm working from essentially a document that has got to the point where it's actually a known entity. So I'm working on some stuff at the moment, and I'm moving stuff around, and it definitely isn't the case that it matters where it came from. What's actually important is
That is not an annotated
so
bibliography.
again, it's yeah. Well, I still haven't found a decent. We haven't really discussed that because you mentioned it passing at the beginning of a meeting, but I never quite saw the definition of what it is. I saw a diagram, but
There
I
is a
still
definition on our website because this is a big thing for Dini. So if you look under authoring in XR, there's a link to one, an official one. This is in the humanities. It's different from how we work. So Dini has been explaining it to me. Let's put it that way. So
So
the
what do
point
you think it is? You explain to me in your work what you think it is.
you, I'll use my words, but this is what Dini told me.
Yeah, sure, sure. Yeah, yeah.
When you, let's say you're a student and you've been told to write about something, the first thing you need to do is gather a bibliography to show your supervisor that this is what I plan to go through. And that
Yep.
bibliography should contain extracts with you having considered what they are. You know, whether you agree with stuff, disagree, how things connect.
Yeah. So that's not dissimilar then to the literary review section of your thesis.
Absolutely, completely
It's
agree.
just in this case, it is essentially the whole document. So
Yes,
so a really interesting thing that we have the opportunity to do now is it used to be go find the things, copy some of that into there, then do it. We can do that much more elegantly now because
exactly.
if we sort of say, right, the first point, so in my volume that is going to be this document, I will have 10 references.
Yeah,
So I've got 10 objects whose information is the reference they are. They're not part of the export because I'm only using some of their information. They're in the space so I can use them. So I now sort of go paragraph one. I'm going to write about reference one. I take the the first bit of information I want from reference one. I put that into an object. That object knows that the information in this field came from that thing. I then start writing about it. I may then perhaps get another thing from the same source and write a bit about that. I then make another object that's based on a different thing, but I'm also not necessarily at that point, but they have the opportunity that these objects I can chain together because that effectively then becomes the narrative braid of my annotated bibliography. The thing I'm very aware of is that you end up in the same point as something you might have written in Word, but from a totally different and much more flexible standpoint. Not least of which because it allows the affordance of the very thing you've discussed, which is for things to broadly know where they come from, without having to move around lots of things that are carrying, frankly, more information than they need, just to be of use in the next place, because the relationship between the objects is done to the extent that if I had a panel floating in space, that the object showing that would just be say, go and look at object 1, 2, 3, 4, find field X and get me the second paragraph of that. And that is what goes in the box. That is using essentially linked data. And this goes to the point about how much information do I need to have in my environment, in my volume, immediately to hand. as opposed to something where I actually have to say, look, I want you to go out to the internet. I want you to go and find the thing that's at the end of this sort of long string of figures and bring me back whatever you find. And there's a subtle difference there. It's not just speed, actually. It's having more certainty that you're going to get what you thought you got. But I think that gets to the heart of, so the annotated bibliography is essentially, as far as I can see, a narrative constructed. Well, you see, it isn't entirely constructed of references because it's going to have an introduction and end, and those won't be references. But essentially, where the body copy consists entirely of comments on sources, which are the annotations of the bibliographic items. But it's quite cool to be able to have a proto document or a sort of volume that is like a proto document where, okay, so instead of saying I've got all these references and I'll sort of paste them into Word and then I'll put a couple blank lines in between, is no, just over there in that corner there are a set of references. I know I'm going to use them, and perhaps they might even signal to me whether they're used or indeed how many times I've used them, because we could do that. We could do that with a color also. Yeah, I mean, that's in a sense, an implementation issue, but we could do that because they're in the space and they know because they're interrelated and they know why they're interrelated and for what reason. And the objects can be charged with managing the tellback to you. So you don't have to do this as long as you say, if you're a bibliography, just show me show me, say just show me a number just floating above you, which is a number of times you've been used. So then I don't need a link. I don't need a visual link because I just know, okay, 3 times, fine. Because this volume is about the things in here, so that the 3 can only relate to the number of times I have made a reference to it. And that becomes much cleaner. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So when it comes to giving the thing a this is category type, whatever we call it, as you can see here, option 5 in this happens to be reference. I haven't started using it yet because it doesn't exist, but the notion is exactly what you're saying. And I think we can go quite far with it because as you go, let's just do a quick one live. So we go to 7 hypertexts, open that, and then I find this bit here, copy as a citation. For the record, that is, of course, copy quote. Go back to author, not this one. And I'm just going to, as you know very well, here it is, right?
Yeah.
So the notion that would be that you can also put it on the map. So just because Dini wants it free form, which I completely agree with. And then because you also have up here, you have all the references.
Give me 10 minutes. Sorry.
No,
sorry, I literally just came back. Give me, but give me 10 minutes. Yeah. No, I get that. And
no, I know you do. I know you do. So this is, I know you know this, but for context, right? You have all of this stuff. So it should absolutely be fair enough to allow someone to, let's say these are the thing. Oh no, hang on, I want this there. To literally make a list in space and just say, turn this into a linearized form. And then all the comments that you've written plus that becomes all very beautiful here in this. You export that, but you export it with this intact.
Yeah, what you will find, the nested challenge you haven't got yet to is that people will want to nest things. So a challenge with the map, and this is something there's a 20-year-old
and revealing is the #1 challenge. Yes.
Yeah, no, but I mean, there's to my knowledge, 20 years worth of robust to and fro been going on in Tinderbox community because its maps are flat. As yours is, for a very good reason. And people basically want to say, no, but I want this thing. I want this thing to be a sort of child of that in the external thing. You can do that, but it actually it's harder than you think because you end up tying yourself in knots between the difference between this space. In 3D, I guess you could do it by on the Z plane, but I'm still not convinced that actually people would find that as intuitive as we might posit it would be. Yep.
This is the challenge. Now, for our XR work, in Author, because you can link to local documents, you can nest things. So if you have one map and you have an item to something else opens up as a map, quite crude, It doesn't deal with everything, but that's why it's important to be able to see through, which is the difficulty issue.
But
So,
indeed, you can do that with sort of like a story space map at the moment. You could do a similar sort of paradigm. The problem with that is that's not what people want. What they actually want to see is they want to see sort of, n levels of their outline flattened onto a map, which is what that's how they describe it, without understanding that has implications, because the relationship, that relationship, you could draw it as a line, is one way to do it. You could literally draw it almost. Well, that's what things like Vicky and VKB were trying to do. They were saying if you're a list, if you're an item in a list and you're indented, X inches or pixels or whatever, you are a sub item to that thing. But it gets quite clunky quite fast, which is why the flexibility of the open volume is much more useful in the exploratory state. And I think what you want to think about, and this is an active debate I'm involved in elsewhere, is you actually need a different sort of map for output. So you have again, it's like a view spec. You have the same things, the same objects. You put them in a different space, and what that space does is it is about diagramming. So it's about saying, no, this is the parent of that.
yeah, Mark, this is really important, and this was the key breakthrough that you and Dave put in the paper that really helped me sew up my thesis together. There is a difference between hypertext for thinking and hypertext for presentation, and that is really, really important. And the easier you can have the same data and present it in different ways, the easier the process. Absolutely. All I was talking about was as you gather all these bibliographic bits and you have little, I like this, I don't like that, whatever, you should be able to just squish it into a box, write an intro, write an outro, and then send it to someone else. They'll get it as a nice thing or map or whatever.
But a challenge. You'll find people who are more used to dealing with sort of ideas and the like will get that. Most people who are more used to writing will not get that and will push back heavily against it because there's a degree of literalism to it. If they can't see it, it doesn't exist. They struggle, and I don't make this as judgment, but it's evident that they struggle to see that outline as reflecting this long form text. And it is problematic because at some point you can't put all the text on screen. And you need a way for people to say, no, you can do this. I mean, Scrivener's Scrivener's USP is this thing where effectively you have a long form that is in fact made up of the outline that you have on the left-hand side. It seems like a simple trick, but for some people it works really well. Interesting, a lot of people just don't like it at all. And I think where they don't like it is that they want the exploratory thing. So the missing piece of the jigsaw that I'm beginning to see is that you may have something that looks like the same map, but it actually has its construction, its design intent is different. It does things that the exploratory map cannot do, and the exploratory map does things Mark, the diagramming map cannot do.
Yes, and I'm very grateful to you for that. And also, one of the things, so I write now a diary. It helps my thinking. It becomes a bit long. And of course, in my diary, I can link to headings in Author. That's easy. But what I cannot do in another document, link to a heading in another document. That makes me think of our volumes and objects. You should be able to link to a specific object in a volume. It should be knowable, addressable externally, right?
Yes, the reason it's probably not so is that this goes back to the fact that, well, do you think of a heading when you're writing your document? This is where outlines really bite us, because we think, right, I'm starting at the beginning of chapter 2, so I'll call this chapter 2 and I'll write some text, and then I'll put something inside it that's sort of section 1.1.
If someone
now I want to get back to
now I want to get back to that's not the best.
No, exactly. No, I want to get back to chapter 1. That chapter 1.1 was in a sense like a massive block quote. Outlines can't cope with that in the way that they're currently
Mark, this is a huge issue you and I have worked on, and the interim solution for me is to be able to mark text in the paragraphs because it helps you when you fold, right?
Yeah, sure. I was getting to a point about that.
Headings are incredibly limited, no question about that. I'm only interrupting you because I hear you have to go. Mm. Absolutely, but still, there are times when you do want higher level addressability.
Well, as long as your heading's an object, there's no reason it can't be an object. It doesn't have to have any text because it knows its child objects. or it can do because you tell it
No, no,
that,
I
that these
understand.
items are part of chapter two. So it can have an object whose only role in the volume is to be chapter two.
Yeah.
That's very easily doable.
Yeah, yes, sure. I understand from that perspective. But what I think is very, very promising, and tomorrow, of course, there is Dini and Fabienne and me have this meeting, and then hopefully you'll join us afterwards,
Mm-hmm.
where we'll go through the premise that we'll have objects and volumes. These objects need to have some way to say what they are as far as the author intended, but that should be something that shouldn't be too hard-edged, and the reader, user, should be able to deal with it entirely differently. But in order to have a space where you can have an outline, define concepts, references, all of these things as meaningful, semantically speaking, metadata speaking. That's why yesterday, in my brief presentation, I have a core document and I have all the additional stuff. Additional stuff only because logically it's easier to have them in a different part of the space. That's it.
Okay, so as a thought experiment for you to noodle on tomorrow, to just to pick up your point is what this mean is that so let's say I've made a volume. I should be I should be the sort of the king by here. So I made a volume. I give it to you, and you think you open it up that I don't understand what this is. I can't make this for head or tail. But you want to be able to say, right, I know it's all the bits for a book. Let's say it's a novel. So you want to so what you might reasonably want to do is get all the different type things and just put them in a different part of the space. So I want all the characters don't
Exactly. Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
and so the
100%.
point being that my intent is a serving suggestion, but you may even then you may not understand it, and you're not required to understand it. It is therefore incumbent on the creator, or well, both the framework and the creator, to put necessary and sufficient information in that it's more than just an information soup for somebody else. I think that's the interesting nuance of so for an object, what are the things it has to know? And I don't think of them in terms of named things. It's more the what. It's less what they're called, but what are the things it sort of needs to know. So
Yeah,
it sort of needs to know its role, small r. It
yeah,
needs to possibly know its relationship to a number of other things. It might belong to one or more sets, lists of other objects. That's that's probably the most productive way of unpicking it that will give you the most bang for your buck in terms of what we go to build.
yeah. Now, this goes all the way back to one of my first meetings with Wendy. She wants to be able to take things like a tweet, put it in, and then export. That's what we're doing. Knowledge bits. Anyway, look forward to tomorrow.
Okay.
Thank you for today. If you don't mind, I'll upload this with a bit of a summary and
Well,
whatnot.
that's fine. Yeah.
Cool. All
People
right.
understand how they wait.
Bye for now. Thank you again.
Okay. Bye.